Today we are working with long division using decimals. So the first thing we need to remember is that dividing using decimals is very, very similar to just regular old long division that you're used to, in the fact that you're first going to divide, then multiply, and then subtract, and then if you need to, bring down. Then you repeat those steps again until you either get to 0 or you divide it out and then round to whichever place we tell you to when we do start actually rounding to different place values. For these, they're all going to work out evenly, so we're going to end up ending when we get to 0. So let's get started. The first one we're going to do is number 1, 5.6 divided by 6.4. The first number in our problem goes inside the division sign. The second one, 6.4, would go on the outside. Sometimes if your answers seem to not be working out evenly, it's always a good double check to do, to go back to the beginning to make sure that you placed your numbers correctly. All right, to start, the one curveball that gets thrown in whenever you're dividing with decimals that you don't have to think about or deal with when you're working with whole numbers is that you have to multiply by 10 for both numbers before you get started to make the number outside the brackets into a whole number. So here we would be multiplying by 10. When you multiply by 10, you move your decimal point one space to the right. In this case, there's only one number to the right of the decimal, so we just have to swoop it over once. If you do it once here, you also have to do it once here. That's very important to remember. And then you bring your decimal point up. Just to make it look a little cleaner, I'm going to rewrite the problem down here. 64 divided by 56. And I brought my decimal point up again. All right, let's get started. I'm going to rewrite our steps right here so that we have them to reference as we work. Let me do it again. So the first step is to see how many times 64 goes into 56. And if you're already thinking, well, it doesn't, you're correct. It's too big to fit inside 56. So we can add a 0 as a placeholder. 64 can go into 560 8 times. Then we divide it. Now we need to multiply. 8 times 64 is 512. Notice when I write my numbers in, I'm only using one square per number. This is a setting on OneNote for the rule lines for your pages. I highly suggest that you use the grid. It helps keep everything nice and organized. You don't want any of those silly little mistakes of not lining up your numbers. We divided, then we multiplied. Now it's time to subtract. This would become a 10 because we're going to borrow. Sorry, that would become a 5. 10 minus 2 is 8. 5 minus 1 is 4. 5 minus 5 is 0, but you don't have to write the 0 because 48 is the same thing as just 48. Now, once again, we're looking at 64, seeing how many times it goes into 48. You're right, it doesn't. 48 is too small. We know that we can add a 0 at the end because we have a decimal point here, and as many zeros out to the end of the decimal, to the right of the decimal, don't change the number. They're just placeholders. So we're going to bring that 0 down. Then we're going to ask how many times 64 can go into 480. So I'm going to do 480 divided by 64. It goes in 7 times. 7 times 64 is 448. I just multiplied, so now I need to subtract next. I would need to borrow again. 10 minus 8 is 2. 7 minus 4 is 3. And once again, 4 minus 4 is 0, but you don't have to write it. We're in the same position where 64 can't go into 32. We have to add another placeholder up here. 64 does, however, go into 320. It actually goes in nice and evenly, right at 5. 5 times 64 is 320. Then you subtract 0, 0, 0. Just a good double check. and our answer is 0.875. When we read this number, we would say 875 thousandths because the last digit is in the thousandth place. All right, let's do another one together. 9.1 divided by 0.5. First thing I'm going to do is set up my problem. I know that 9.1 is going to go on the inside. 0.5 goes on the outside. Next step, make this one look like a whole number by multiplying it by 10. When I multiply by 10, I swoop my decimal over to the right, one space. If I did one space to the right here, I know I have to swoop to the right here as well. And then bring up your decimal point because that's where it's going to need to be in your answer. To make it look cleaner, once again, I'm going to rewrite my problem below. Notice I've already brought up the decimal. That's super, super important not to forget. And now what it looks like I have is 5 divided into 91. So 91 divided by 5, which is a much easier looking problem than 0.5 and dividing it into 9.1. 5 can go into 9 one time. Then we need to multiply. 1 times 5 gives us 5. And then we subtract. 9 minus 5 is 4. We bring that 1 down. And then we ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 41? And the answer is 8. 8 times 5 is 40. Now we need to subtract. 1 minus 0 is 1, and 4 minus 4 cancels out. That's 0. Now 5 cannot go into 1 evenly, or at all, so we need to add a 0 as a placeholder, bring it all the way down. 5 can go into 10 2 times. 2 times 5 is 10. 10 minus 10 is 0, of course, and our answer is 18.2. And the last one we're going to do is 6.5 divided by 1.25. I'm going to start by writing my numbers where they go. 6.5 goes inside of the bracket because it's what's being divvied up. And 1.25 goes on the outside. This one's a little different than the ones we've done earlier because on the earlier ones, we only had 2 numbers here, 2 digits to the right of the decimal point. Here we actually have 2. But again, we need to make this number into a whole number by multiplying by 10. So I'm going to multiply by 10 once. My decimal still isn't at the end, so I'm going to multiply by 10 again and swoop to the right again. If I multiply by 10 twice here, I'm going to do the same here. Move it over here, and then I know I need to do it again. When you do that and there's an empty space here, you're going to fill that in with a 0. And then we're going to bring our decimal point up. Super important step. Don't forget that decimal point. To make it look a lot neater, I'm just going to rewrite it right down here. 125 divided into 650. I'm going to bring my decimal point up. All right, and we are ready to get started. Remember our steps. We divide, then we multiply, subtract, bring down, then we get to do it all over again till it works out nice and cleanly. All right, to begin, we're going to ask ourselves how many times 125 could go into 650. The answer is 5 times with some left over. Now we need to multiply. 5 times 125. The answer is 625. Then we subtract. We have to borrow. So this becomes 4. 10 minus 5 is 5. 4 minus 2 is 2. And 6 minus 6 is 0. You don't have to write it. 125 cannot go into 25. It's too small, so we need to add another 0 as our placeholder. If we're looking 125 to see how many times it can go into 250, the answer is 2 times. 2 times 125 is 250. We need to subtract 0. 5 minus 5 is 0, and 2 minus 2 is 0. So our answer is 5.2. When we say this answer, we would say 5 and 2/10 because the last digit is in the 10th place. And that is how you use long division to divide with decimals. Again, if it feels